Hello, math students. It's Mrs. Marcellus and Froginacci. In a previous lesson, we learned about identifying and locating points on the coordinate plane and determining which quadrant they were in. Today we're going to take a look at graphing on the coordinate plane. Today's learning objective: students will graph ordered pairs, including rational numbers, on the coordinate plane by finding their locations on the x-axis and y-axis. Students will also find distance on the coordinate plane by plotting two ordered pairs and counting the units between them. Well, there's no new vocabulary today, Froginacci, so what do you say? Shall we hop to it? First, let's graph a point on the coordinate plane. If you remember, we call this an ordered pair because the coordinates are in a specific order. It is always the x value followed by the y value. Therefore, when we graph on the coordinate plane, we'll go to the origin, which is right in the middle where the two intersect, and then we have to go the distance of the first coordinate on the x-axis. Since it's a -5, we'll go 5 units to the left and arrive at -5. Then we need to go to -3 on the y-axis. That means we need to go down 3 units. Then we'll put a point at the location -5, -3. Since we only have one point to graph, it's not necessary to label the point. It is also not necessary to draw the line from 0 to -5 and then down to -3. I just did that to show you how we arrived at our final destination. Sometimes you will be asked to plot multiple points on the same coordinate plane. When you do this, you typically are also asked to label them. Let's graph the following points on the coordinate plane. First, we'll start with 0, -5. As always, we start at the origin. We go 0 on the x-axis. That means we do not move either left or right. Then we need to go to -5 on the y-axis and mark our point. We also need to remember to label this as point A. Next, let's graph point B. We'll start at the origin and we need to go left 4 1/2 units on the x-axis. That will put us between -4 and -5. Then we will go up 3 on the y-axis, and we will land in between the two lines, and we'll label that point B. Next, we'll graph C. For C, we'll start at the origin, and since it's positive, we'll go to the right 5 1/2 units. That will put us between 5 and 6 on the x-axis. We go 0 units on the y-axis, so that means we're going to land on the axis itself. We'll put our point there, and we'll label it C. And finally, we'll graph point D. To graph D, we'll start at the origin, and we'll go 3 1/2 units on the x-axis. This puts us between 3 and 4. Then we need to go down 1 1/2 units because it's negative. That puts us between -1 and -2. When you have 2 half units, you're going to be in the middle of the box. So we'll put our dot there, and we'll label that point D. We have now graphed and labeled points A, B, C, and D. In this case, we are asked to graph and reflect multiple points on the same coordinate plane. It's really important to read the directions carefully so that you don't miss which of the two axes you're supposed to reflect across. First, let's start by plotting point L. We'll go 3 to the right and up 5, and we'll plot and label point L. Next, we need to reflect this point across the x-axis. That means we're going to cross over the x and land in quadrant 4. We'll go +3 units and then go down 5 units to get to our reflection. To properly label the reflection, we'll use the same letter, but we'll use a little power sign. It's L prime. It also looks like L to the first power. Next, let's graph M. To graph M, we'll go a -3 1/2 units on the x-axis, so that'll put us between -3 and -4, and then we go 0 on the y-axis. That means that we're going to land right on the axis, and this will be point M. We're asked to reflect this across the y-axis, so that means we'll be on the other side of it, 3 1/2 units. I'll put my reflection on the other side, and that is M prime. And finally, we'll graph N. To graph N, we'll go -1 on the x-axis and up 1 1/2 on the y-axis. That will put us between 1 and 2. And we'll mark our point as N. We've been asked to reflect this point across the x-axis, so that means we'll end up in quadrant 3. We'll go -1 and then down 1 1/2 units. We'll put our dot between -1 and -2 right on the line there, and we'll mark that as N prime. Next, we've been asked to find the distance between each pair of points. If we go to point L, we can see that we are 5 units above and 5 units below the x-axis to get from L to L prime. The total distance between the two is 10 units. M is 3 1/2 units away from the y-axis in both directions. We'll have 3 1/2 plus 3 1/2, and that gives us a total distance of 7 units. And finally, N is 1 1/2 units above the axis and 1 1/2 below. If we add 1 1/2 plus 1 1/2, we get a total distance of 3. We have successfully graphed 3 points in their reflections and found the distance between each pair of points. Let's do our final problem. The Wildlife Association wanted to create a garden area for frogs at the preserve. Graph the points below to represent the garden. What is its shape? Including the reflections, it looks like we have 4 points here, so I would guess that that would be some type of square or rectangular shape, but let's see what happens. First, we'll plot point K, which is -2, -5. So to the left 2 and down 5 will give us point K. Then we will plot L. That would be 4 to the left and up 5. Next, we will reflect K across the y-axis. That's kind of interesting. I would think that we'd want that to be up by L if it was going to be a rectangle, but we'll see what happens. Going across the y-axis means that we will be +2 and -5. So we're 2 units away from the y-axis, but in the opposite direction. To properly label it, that would be K prime. Then finally, we want to reflect L across the x-axis. This is not turning out as I would have expected. We will go -4 and down 5 because we need to go across the x-axis. I'll go ahead and mark my point and label it L prime. Now I need to connect the dots. First, I need to connect L to L prime. Then I need to connect L prime to K and then to K prime. That's because all 3 of them fall in a straight line. Finally, we'll connect L to K prime. Surprisingly, this turns out to be a triangle. And more specifically, it is a right triangle. That will make a nice shape for the frog garden. Well, math students, this concludes our unit on integers, rational numbers, and the coordinate plane. Froganachi and I are going to head on down to the preserve and check out that new garden area. Plus, he'd like me to meet some of his friends. So, I'm signing off for now, and Froganachi says, Arrivederci!